Stay with me forever. Those were the words a lonely rancher spoke as he placed warm bread into the trembling hands of a widow with four starving children. But tell me this, what does a mother feel when her cupboards are empty, when her children eat scraps while she swallows her own hunger in silence? How heavy is that shame? How sharp is that pain? And yet could this desperate encounter at the edge of despair become the beginning of a new life? Could a woman the world mocked as too poor, too broken, one day be cherished as priceless? The Wyoming plains were endless miles upon miles of parched earth, dotted with sagebrush and the occasional cottonwood tree, its leaves trembling like frail hands in the wind. The sun was merciless that summer, and even the birds had stopped singing. Dust clung to the horizon like an old memory no rain could wash away. And in a leaning cabin at the edge of a worn trail lived Clara Whitfield, 50 years old, a widow and mother of four children. Her story was not one of sudden tragedy, but of slow erosion. Like the river carving out a canyon, grief had worn away at her life until only fragments of the woman she once was remained. When her husband Elias fell ill with fever 2 winters ago, Clara had tended him with all the devotion in her heart. She boiled herbs, she whispered prayers, she sang lullabies in the dark, though her voice cracked with age. But fever is a merciless thief. It stole Elias's breath one night while the children slept beside the embers. Clara buried him on a hillside with her own hands, snow stinging her cheeks, her children clinging to her skirts, asking questions she had no answers for. That was the beginning of the long suppression. At first, she believed her in-laws would help. Elias's family had land cattle and enough to spare. But pity is often thin when weighed against mouths to feed. "You're strong," Clara, Elias's brother, had said, eyes cold as steel. "You'll manage." And with that, they turned away. She was left with four children: Samuel, 12, Anna, 10, Matthew, 7, and little Rose, just 5 years old. The children were her heartbeat, her only wealth. But children cannot live on love alone. Each day became a battle against hunger. Clara sold her wedding ring for flour. She stitched clothes for neighbors in exchange for potatoes and onions. When there was nothing left, she scavenged. At the end of market days, when stalls were emptied and vendors gone, she and her children gathered bruised apples, bread crusts, and chicken bones stripped of meat. The children learned silence and hunger. Samuel, the eldest, gave his portion to Rose, whispering, "Mama needs her strong." Anna held her little sister's hand through the nights, when the wind howled so loud it sounded like wolves scratching at the door. And Clara, with dignity etched into every wrinkle, hid her tears in the dark. The whispers of neighbors stung worse than hunger. "She's too old to raise four alone. Look at her, still plump while her children starve. Useless woman, no man will ever take her. Not at her age, not with those burdens." Words can wound deeper than knives, and Clara carried their cuts quietly. She never replied, never begged. She bent her back to her sewing, lifted the bucket at the well, walked with steady steps, though her knees ached. In her heart, though the suppression was heavy, she longed to scream at the sky, to rage at the injustice. But what good would it do? Who would hear? Instead, she swallowed her pain like bitter medicine and carried on. There were moments, brief flashes, when the old Clara resurfaced. Once, when Rose brought her a wildflower yellow as sunlight, Clara smiled, truly smiled, for the first time in months. Another evening, when Matthew tried to make a joke about the rooster that crowed at midnight, she laughed, though it came out like a sob. These moments reminded her she was still alive, but they also reminded her of what she had lost. Every night when the children were asleep, Clara sat by the hearth staring at the dying embers. She whispered into the silence, "God, don't let me fail them." One evening in late autumn, after days of empty cupboards, Samuel came home with a small sack. His eyes glowed with a strange light. "Mama," he said, "the grocer's boy gave me scraps from their table. Inside were stale biscuits, a strip of bacon fat, and half an onion. Food for a day, maybe two." Clara's heart twisted with gratitude and shame. Her son, still a child, had begged. That night she boiled the scraps into a thin soup, dividing it evenly. She herself did not eat. Samuel noticed. "Mama, you must," he insisted. Clara stroked his hair. "I have already eaten, my love." It was a lie, but one she told often. That night Samuel whispered to Anna when Clara thought they slept, "She can't go on like this." "We need someone," Anna replied, her voice trembling. "But who would want us? We're too many, too poor." Their words pierced Clara's heart, but she said nothing. She lay awake until dawn, staring at the roof beams. The breaking point came one cold morning when Rose fainted. Clara had been sewing by the window when she heard the thud. The little girl lay on the floor, pale as milk. Clara scooped her up, panic clawing at her chest. She held Rose close, rocking her, whispering, "Stay with me, baby. Stay." When Rose finally stirred her eyes, weak and frightened, Clara wept openly. She knew then something had to change. Scraps would not save them. Pride would not feed them. But what choice did she have? The world was wide and merciless. Clara had been abandoned by family, rejected by neighbors, and ignored by men who saw her as a burden. She was too old to remarry, too poor to start anew, too weary to keep fighting. Yet she could not surrender, not while 4 pairs of eyes looked to her for survival. In her heart, she prayed not for herself, but for her children. "Lord, send someone, anyone." That evening, when the sky turned red as blood and the wind carried the smell of smoke from distant fires, Clara sat outside with Rose on her lap. The girl was still weak, sipping thin broth. A creak of wheels broke the silence. Down the dusty road came a wagon drawn by 2 strong horses. Upon the seat sat a man, broad-shouldered, weathered by years of sun and toil. His hat was pulled low, but his eyes, when he drew close, were steady, not sharp like others. He reined in before Clara's gate. For a long moment he said nothing, simply studying the scene. A tired woman, 4 hungry children, a cabin sagging like an old man's back. Then he climbed down. From the wagon he took a bundle bread, still warm, wrapped in cloth, and a small jug of milk. Clara froze her breath, caught in her chest. No one brought gifts here. No one came with kindness. The man knelt before Rose, held out the bread. His voice was deep, gentle, carrying the calm of a river. "Eat, little one." Rose reached timidly, then looked to her mother. Clara hesitated, pride warring with desperation. But when she saw her daughter's hollow eyes, she nodded. Rose tore off a piece and chewed slowly, tears sliding down her cheeks. Clara looked at the man. "Why?" she whispered. The man met her gaze. For a long moment, silence stretched between them. Then he said words she would never forget, because no family should eat scraps. He paused, his eyes softening. "And because I have bread enough to share." That night, for the first time in years, Clara and her children ate until they were full. The bread was coarse, the milk thin, but to them it was a feast. Clara sat quietly, watching her children, smile, crumbs on their cheeks, laughter in their voices. She felt something stir within her, something she thought had long died, hope. The man had not stayed. He had left as silently as he came. But as he mounted his wagon, he had spoken once more. "I'll be back tomorrow. There's more than bread I wish to bring." Then he tipped his hat and drove into the dusk. That night, Clara lay awake by the fire. The children slept soundly, their bellies warm. She whispered into the shadows, "Who are you, stranger, and why me?" For the first time, she did not feel alone. Clara had endured hunger, humiliation, and silence. But the arrival of a rancher with bread had cracked open the door to something new. Was it mercy, pity, or the beginning of a life she never dared to imagine? Morning broke over the Wyoming plains in shades of pale rose and gold. The frost still clung to the grass like tiny shards of glass glimmering in the weak sunlight. Clara rose before the children, her body aching from too many years of hard labor and too many nights of little rest. She set water to boil more out of habit than necessity, for there was little left to cook. Yet something was different. The air seemed less heavy, as though the burden of hunger had lifted, if only slightly. She remembered the man's words as he departed the night before, "I'll be back tomorrow." Her mind replayed the scene endlessly. His broad shoulders, the way his voice carried not pity, but quiet assurance, the simple gift of bread. Bread had been her children's salvation last night, and she could still hear their laughter echoing like birdsong in her ears. Who was he? She whispered to herself, fingers absently smoothing her faded apron. And why us? By mid-morning, Samuel was chopping wood near the lean-to, Anna tending to Rose, and Matthew running after the old hen that had somehow survived the lean winter. Clara tried to occupy herself with mending shirts, but her eyes kept darting to the horizon, her ears straining for the sound of wheels. And then there it was, the creak of wooden spokes, the rhythmic clop of hooves on frozen dirt. A wagon rolled into view, and upon it sat the man once more. His hat cast a shadow over his eyes, But even from a distance, Clara recognized the way he held himself steady, calm as though the storms of life could bend him but never break him. He reined in the horses before the gate. Samuel dropped his axe. Anna grabbed Rose's hand, and even Matthew stopped chasing the hen to stare. Clara stepped forward, heart pounding. "Good morning, ma'am," the man said, tipping his hat politely. "I promised I'd return." He introduced himself, Thomas Avery, a rancher whose land stretched beyond the hills. Clara had heard the name before in whispers at the market, usually spoken with respect. He was known as a fair man, though solitary, since his wife's passing years earlier. From the back of his wagon, Thomas lifted down another bundle, this time larger. Flour beans, dried meat, a jug of milk, and a sack of apples. Clara's eyes widened and the children gasped. "You shouldn't," she began, her voice faltering. "We can't repay you." Thomas looked at her evenly. "I didn't come for repayment." His eyes softened as they fell on little Rose, still frail. "I came because no child should go hungry. Not while I've got more than I need." The words were simple, but they struck Clara like a hammer against stone. She had grown used to charity wrapped in judgment, help tangled with conditions. But this was freely given, no strings, no hidden barbs. That day, Thomas did not leave right away. He stayed and helped Samuel mend the broken fence, showing the boy how to secure the boards with wire instead of rope. He let Matthew sit on his horse, guiding the reins with a patience Clara had never expected from a man his size. He spoke gently with Anna about her drawings, admiring the careful sketches she had made in charcoal on scraps of paper. Clara watched it all in silence, her emotions a storm beneath her calm exterior. The children laughed and worked as though Thomas had always been part of their world. Rose even climbed onto his knee at midday, holding an apple as though it were treasure. And Clara, she wanted to believe this was real. But shadows of doubt whispered in her ear. Why is he here? What does he truly want? When the chores were finished and the sun began to sink, Thomas prepared to leave. Clara walked with him to the gate. "You've already done too much," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "We can't depend on you. We must find our own way." Thomas studied her, his weathered face unreadable. "Clara," he said at last, "I'm not here to take your pride. I'm here to offer something. I think you've forgotten you deserve kindness." Her throat tightened and she looked away. "Kindness always comes with a price." Thomas's gaze did not waver. "Not mine." With that, he mounted his wagon and left the sound of his wheels fading into the dusk. That night, Clara sat by the fire long after the children slept. She held one of the apples in her hand, its skin red and perfect. Such a small thing, and yet it felt like a symbol, a gift of dignity, a reminder that the world could still hold goodness. And though she tried to push it away, a thought kept rising like dawn. What if Thomas is different? Days passed. Thomas returned again and again, each visit bringing not just food but presents. He helped mend the roof before the winter rains. He brought Samuel a proper axe, Anna a set of colored pencils, Matthew a carved wooden horse, and Rose a warm shawl. But he also brought something Clara had not known in years: companionship. They spoke little at first, only about chores, weather, the land. Yet slowly she found herself sharing more memories of Elias, her fears for the children, her small joys. Thomas listened without judgment, his eyes steady, his silences never empty. He never pushed, never pried. And in those silences, Clara felt seen. One afternoon as the children played, Thomas lingered by the fence. He looked out at the barren fields, then at Clara. "You've carried this burden alone too long," he said softly. Clara's eyes filled with sudden tears. "What choice did I have?" He stepped closer, his voice steady. "Maybe none then, but you have one now." Her breath caught. "What do you mean?" Thomas hesitated, then spoke with quiet gravity. "Clara, I've lived alone for years, raising a ranch that feels too big for one man. My boys, Caleb and Luke, they need a woman's hand, a mother's heart. And your children, they need a home, a father. I can't give you wealth or ease, but I can give you bread, shelter, and a place where you belong. Stay with me." Not as charity, as family. The words struck Clara like thunder. Stay, as family. Could such a thing be real? Her heart wrestled between fear and longing. For years she had been judged, dismissed, abandoned. Could she risk trusting again? Could she place her children's lives in another man's hands? That night, as the children slept peacefully with full bellies, Clara stared at the ceiling. Thomas's words echoed in her mind. Stay with me, as family. Was this hope or just another illusion waiting to break? Clara had spent years bearing her pain, surviving on scraps, believing kindness always came with a price. But Thomas's offer was something new, an open door she had never dared to imagine. Would she walk through it? The days that followed Thomas's proposal unfolded like the slow stretching of spring after a long, bitter winter. Clara woke each morning with a heaviness in her chest, the words, "Stay with me," as family echoing in her mind. She wanted to believe. Oh, how she wanted to. But shadows of the past clung to her heart like burrs to fabric. One evening, while mending clothes by the fire, Samuel asked quietly, "Mama, do you think Mr. Avery means it, about us staying at his ranch?" Clara's hands stilled on the needle. She looked at her eldest, only 14, but with worry lines already forming across his brow. Life had forced him into manhood too soon. "I don't know," Clara admitted softly. "He seems kind." Samuel's eyes burned. Men seem kind until they're not. His words sliced through her. He had overheard too much in his short-life arguments with Elias, nights of silence, after harsh words the day his father left for work and never returned. Samuel had learned suspicion early, and Clara had no answer for it. A week later, Thomas came again, this time with his two boys, Caleb and Luke. They were lively, eager to meet Clara's children, and soon the yard rang with shouts and laughter. Caleb raced Samuel in chopping wood, Luke chased Matthew around the barn, and Anna shyly showed her sketches to Thomas, who praised them with a fatherly smile. Clara watched from the porch, her heart twisting. The sight was beautiful, 6 children laughing, as though they had always been siblings. Yet beauty frightened her because beauty had always been temporary in her life. Thomas joined her on the steps. He leaned on the railing, his voice quiet. "They get along well." Clara nodded, arms folded tight. "Too well. Children, they don't understand how quickly things can change." Thomas looked at her, his eyes shadowed with something she could not name. "Or maybe they understand better than we think. They don't waste time with pride. They take love where they find it." Clara's throat tightened. She turned away, unable to face his gaze. "And what if it doesn't last? What if they lose this too?" Thomas did not press. He only said, "Then maybe it's still worth giving them the chance." That night, Clara lay awake, listening to the steady breathing of her children. Her mind was a battlefield. She longed for safety, for partnership, for the warmth of a man who seemed steady and true. But fear whispered louder. What if he tires of you? What if he regrets? What if his kindness is only for a season? She had been told too many times that she was too much, too heavy, too plain, too worn. Could she risk hearing those words again? One afternoon, Clara walked into town for supplies. She kept her head low as always, but whispers still reached her. "Did you hear Avery's been keeping company with that widow? The one with 4 mouths to feed? Foolish man. He could have his pick and he chooses her. Desperate, that's what she is. Clinging to him so she doesn't starve." Each word was a lash across Clara's back. She gripped her basket tighter, refusing to let her tears show. As she stepped out of the store, Thomas was waiting by his wagon. He saw her pale face, the way her shoulders hunched, and his jaw hardened. "They don't know you," he said simply, offering his hand to help her up. Clara hesitated. "But they'll never stop talking." Thomas met her eyes. "Then let them talk. What matters is what we build, not what they say." His words were like balm, but Clara's scars ran deep. She climbed into the wagon silently, her heart still divided between longing and fear. A storm came days later, fierce winds tearing shingles from the roof and threatening to collapse the barn. Clara and the children worked frantically to secure what they could. Just as Samuel was about to climb onto the roof, Thomas appeared through the driving rain, his coat soaked, his face grim. "Get down from there, boy," he ordered gently but firmly. "That's my work." Together, he and Clara fought the storm, nailing boards, tying ropes, hauling water away from the foundations. Their hands brushed in the chaos, their eyes met in the flash of lightning, and for a moment Clara felt the old walls inside her crack. When it was over, they stood side by side in the barn, drenched and shivering, watching the rain pound against the earth. Thomas turned to her, his voice low. "You don't have to do this alone anymore." Clara's lips trembled. She wanted to believe. But the old voice inside her rose again. What if he leaves? What if this is only temporary? She stepped back, shaking her head. I can't, I can't ask you to carry my burdens. They're mine. Thomas's eyes darkened, but he did not argue. I'm not offering because you asked, he said. I'm offering because I choose to. His words hung in the air, heavy with truth. But Clara turned away, tears mixing with rain. That night Samuel spoke again. Mama, maybe you should trust him. Just a little. Clara looked at her son, startled. I thought you didn't believe in men like him. Samuel shrugged, staring into the fire. I don't know if I believe, but I see how he looks at you. And at us. Like we matter. Clara's heart swelled, but fear still held her tight. Could she let go of her past long enough to see the gift before her? Clara stood at the edge of a choice, haunted by shame, yet drawn toward hope. Every kindness from Thomas chipped away at her fear, yet every whisper from the town rebuilt the walls around her heart. Would she dare risk love after a lifetime of loss? The storm had passed, but in Clara's heart, the wind still raged. The next days moved in silence. Thomas continued to come by with supplies, mended fences, and helped the boys haul water. He never pressed her with words, but his presence lingered like a steady flame on a cold night. And yet Clara held back. Each kindness rekindled her longing, but each whisper from town rebuilt her fear. One Saturday, Clara took the children into town again. Her basket was light. Scraps were all she could afford. As she stood at the counter, two women near the shelves began to whisper loud enough for her to hear. 4 children and not a penny to her name. And now she's chasing after Thomas Avery. The poor man's desperate, that's all. The words stung sharper than any winter wind. Clara's cheeks burned, her hands trembling. She wanted to vanish. But before she could retreat, Anna, her quiet, gentle daughter, turned to the women with fire in her young eyes. My mama isn't desperate, she said, voice shaking but clear. She works harder than anyone I know. And she's good. That's why Mr. Avery helps us. Because she deserves it. The store fell silent. The women looked startled, then muttered something under their breath and turned away. Clara knelt, gathering Anna into her arms, her own tears falling. Sweetheart, she whispered. But inside a seed had been planted. If her children could see her worth, perhaps she could begin to see it too. The turning point came the following week. Thomas had invited Clara and the children to Sunday supper at his ranch. She hesitated, but Samuel urged her gently. Please, Mama, let's go. So they went. The Avery ranch bustled with life. Caleb and Luke running through the yard, chickens clucking, the smell of bread rising from the oven. Thomas greeted them warmly, pulling out chairs at the long wooden table. For the first time in years, Clara and her children ate until they were full. The boys laughed, Anna's eyes shone, and even Samuel's guarded face softened. But just as Clara began to relax, there came a knock at the door. It was Hank Brewer, a cattleman from town known for his sharp tongue. He stepped inside, uninvited, his eyes flicking from Thomas to Clara. So it's true, Hank sneered. The great Thomas Avery has taken in a beggar woman with 4 mouths to feed. Tell me, Thomas, was it pity, or did she trick you with her tears? The room froze. Clara's children shrank against her, their eyes wide with fear and shame. Clara's body trembled. All her old instincts screamed, stay quiet. Endure it. Hide. For years she had swallowed cruelty like bitter medicine. But something inside her shifted. She saw Anna's small hand gripping hers. Samuel's fist clenched. Thomas's steady gaze fixed on her, not pitying, but waiting. This time she would not stay silent. Clara rose from her chair, her voice shaking but strong. You may laugh at me, Mr. Brewer. You may call me poor or plain or unworthy. I have heard it all before. But let me tell you this. She drew a deep breath, her eyes blazing now. I have worked these hands raw to feed my children. I have buried a husband and stood at the edge of despair. And still I rise each morning, I keep my family alive. That is not weakness. That is strength. Her words fell heavy into the silence. Thomas's eyes shone with quiet pride. He stepped forward, placing his hand firmly on Clara's shoulder. And that's why she is welcome here. She's worth more than a dozen men like you, Hank. Now get off my land. Hank muttered curses but backed out, defeated by the weight of their unity. The door shut and the room exhaled. Clara sank back into her chair, tears streaming not of shame, but of release. For the first time in her life, she had spoken her truth aloud, and for the first time, someone had stood beside her. That night, when the children were asleep, Clara stood outside on the porch. The prairie stretched before her, endless and free beneath a silver moon. Thomas joined her, quietly draping his coat around her shoulders. "You were brave today," he said softly. Clara's voice broke. "I've spent half a lifetime swallowing words, Thomas. But tonight, I couldn't. Not in front of the children." He nodded. "They'll remember. They'll remember their mother stood tall, no matter what anyone said." She looked at him, then the weight of years falling from her eyes. "Do you truly mean it, what you said? That I'm worth more than men like him?" Thomas's voice was low but steady. "Clara, you've been carrying the world on your shoulders alone. Anyone who can endure what you've endured and still keep love in their heart, that's a woman beyond price." Clara trembled not from cold, but from something new, something warm and unfamiliar. She whispered, "I don't know if I can believe in love again." Thomas's smile was gentle, his hand resting lightly over hers. "Then don't. Not yet. Just believe in tomorrow. And let tomorrow lead you where it will." Her heart ached, but for the first time it was an ache filled with possibility. Clara had found her voice at last, breaking free from the chains of silence that had bound her for decades. Yet with freedom came a terrifying question. Could she open her heart to the man who stood beside her, steady as the land itself? The following weeks unfolded like the slow unfurling of spring after a long winter. Something had shifted inside Clara after that night when she had stood up to Hank Brewer. The words she had spoken had not just silenced him, they had awakened something within her, a quiet certainty that she had worth. And once that certainty began to take root, hope blossomed almost against her will. Samuel, who had once been tense and guarded, now carried himself with more ease. He began helping Thomas with chores outside, mending fences, tending to the horses, hauling water. Thomas, patient and steady, never treated the boy like a burden. Instead, he offered small lessons and quiet praise. "You've got strong hands," Thomas told him one afternoon as Samuel tightened a fence post. "Hands that can build things. Don't forget that." Samuel, unused to praise, lowered his head, but Clara saw the faint smile tugging at his lips. Anna, too, blossomed. She spent afternoons with Thomas's sons, gathering eggs or braiding wildflowers into garlands. The house that had once been filled with quiet sorrow now rang with children's laughter as Caleb and Luke's playful mischief mixed with Anna's gentle spirit. Even the younger two, Mary and Ruth, began to laugh more freely. Their thin faces filled out with good food and security. Clara would catch them chasing each other across the yard, hair flying like golden threads in the sunlight, and tears of gratitude would sting her eyes. Clara herself began to feel something she had not known in years: belonging. Each day she contributed to the ranch, cooking hearty meals, mending clothes, planting a kitchen garden near the porch. Her hands, once cracked and weary, seemed to find renewed strength in the rhythm of work. But it was not only work. There were moments of tenderness she had never expected. One chilly evening, Thomas returned late from driving cattle. His coat was torn, his hands blistered. Clara, without thinking, took his hands in hers, cleaned the cuts, and wrapped them with linen. "You shouldn't trouble yourself," Thomas said softly. Clara met his eyes. "It's no trouble to care for someone who's given us so much." For a long moment, they held each other's gaze. Then Thomas, with his usual quietness, nodded. "And it's no trouble to me either, Clara." Something unspoken passed between them, then an acknowledgement that their bond was deepening into something neither of them had dared to name. One Sunday, Thomas suggested they all go to the river. The children squealed with delight, racing ahead through the tall grass. Clara carried a basket filled with bread, cheese, and apples, while Thomas walked beside her, his stride easy and unhurried. They found a spot beneath a cottonwood tree, its leaves whispering in the breeze. The children splashed in the shallows, their laughter mingling with the murmur of the water. Clara sat on the blanket, watching them with a smile she could not suppress. "They look like they've been here all their lives," she murmured. Thomas, sitting beside her, nodded. "That's because they belong here. And so do you, Clara." She turned to him, startled by the weight of his words. "Do I?" she whispered. His gaze was steady. "You've brought warmth to this place. To my boys. To me. Don't doubt that. The river's current sparkled in the sunlight, and Clara felt something loosen inside her like ice melting like chains breaking. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future not of survival alone, but of joy. But hope once stirred must always be tested. The next week, Clara returned to town alone, needing cloth for the children's clothes. She entered the general store with her head higher than before, but the familiar whispers returned. There she is, the widow who trapped Thomas Avery. Poor man saddled with her and her brood. Clara froze for a moment. Then she remembered Anna's fierce defense, Thomas's steady hand on her shoulder, the children's laughter at the river. She drew a breath, straightened her back, and faced the women. Say what you will, she said calmly, her voice firm. But I have children who smile again, a home that welcomes me, and a man who respects me. That is more than cruelty will ever give you. The women fell silent. Clara gathered her cloth and left her heart pounding. For the first time, the words of others did not crush her. They rolled off like rain on stone. That evening after supper, Clara sat on the porch while Thomas joined her. The children were inside their laughter, fading into the walls. The prairie stretched before them, golden with the last light of day. You seemed lighter tonight, Thomas observed gently. Clara smiled faintly. Because I am. I faced them, Thomas, the ones who mocked me. And for once, I didn't shrink. Thomas's eyes warmed with pride. That's because you know your worth now, and so do I. Clara's breath caught. She wanted to speak, to tell him all the gratitude and growing affection in her heart, but the words tangled on her tongue. Instead, she let silence hold them both, the kind of silence that spoke more than words could. Spring was nearing. The garden Clara had planted began to sprout green shoots, pushing through the soil, fragile yet determined. Each morning she checked them with care, her fingers brushing tenderly over the leaves. One morning Thomas came to stand beside her. They'll take root, he said. She looked up at him, realizing he wasn't only speaking of the garden. Yes, she whispered. So will we. Clara had begun to believe again, not in fairy tales, but in the steady, ordinary miracle of family, of respect, of belonging. But even as new life sprouted around her, she knew old wounds and doubts could still rise to test her. The first trial came with the land itself. Spring storms rolled in from the mountains, dark and violent. One night, thunder cracked so loud it rattled the windows, and rain lashed against the roof like 1,000 fists. Clara gathered the children close, calming them with songs, her voice trembling but steady. Thomas, drenched to the bone, fought outside to tie down the livestock, his lantern bobbing like a lone star in the storm. Clara's heart clenched watching him. She had known abandonment, cruelty, and silence, but never a man who risked his body simply to keep others safe. When he finally staggered and soaked and exhausted, Clara pressed a towel into his hands. You'll catch your death out there. He gave a tired smile. Better me than them. Clara's chest tightened. She realized then that his strength wasn't just in his muscles, but in his quiet willingness to bear burdens others would not. A week later, as the land dried, Clara's past came calling. She was in town again, trading eggs and butter, when a familiar voice froze her in place. It was her late husband's brother, a man named Victor. Cruelty hung on him like a coat too often worn. Well, if it isn't Clara, he sneered, looking her up and down. Heard you found yourself a rancher, willing to pity you. Does he know how your last husband left you? How you ate scraps and begged neighbors? The words cut deep, sharper than any knife. Clara felt the old shame rising, that familiar choke of humiliation. People turned to look, whispers buzzing. But before she could reply, a shadow fell across them. Thomas stepped forward, his presence like a wall. His voice was low, calm, but iron lay beneath it. She doesn't need to explain her past, he said firmly. And you don't have the right to define her future. Victor scoffed. She's nothing, but Thomas's eyes hardened. Careful. He didn't raise his fist, but his voice carried the weight of someone who would fight if he must. For a long, tense moment, the street held its breath. Finally, Victor muttered a curse and stalked away. Clara's knees trembled. She looked at Thomas, tears brimming. Why did you? He met her gaze, steady and kind. Because no one has the right to shame you. Not anymore. In that instant, something in Clara broke free. For years, she had lived chained by what others thought. But Thomas's words had cut those chains. Yet freedom brings its own fears. That night, Clara sat awake by the fire staring into the flames. The children slept soundly, their breaths, even their small bodies safe. Thomas sat across from her, mending tack, his hands steady. Finally she spoke. "Why me, Thomas? Why choose me with all my scars, with 4 children, with a past?" People mock. Thomas set down the leather strap and looked into the fire. For a long time he was silent. Then he said, "Because I know what it means to lose, to be laughed at, to feel unworthy. And I also know what it means to keep going, even when everything says quit. You remind me of that strength. And the children, they remind me, life is still worth building." His voice softened. "Clara, I didn't take you in out of pity. I asked you to stay because this house didn't feel like home until you walked into it." Clara's breath caught. No one had ever spoken to her like that. Not her parents, not her late husband, not the town. Only Thomas. The final trial came not from men, but from the land itself. It was a hot, dry afternoon when smoke appeared on the horizon, or a prairie fire whipped by wind racing fast toward the ranch. Panic rippled through the children, but Clara stood firm. "Get the buckets. We'll fight it." For hours they worked Thomas with shovel and wet sacks. Samuel and Caleb hauling water, Anna and Clara guiding the little ones to safety. Flames licked the edges of the fields, smoke choking the sky. At one point Thomas stumbled, coughing, his shirt singed. Clara ran to him, pressing a wet cloth to his face. "Don't you dare fall now," she whispered fiercely. "We need you." But then when a burning beam collapsed near the barn, Clara didn't think she acted. She darted forward, dragging the calves to safety before the fire could consume them. Her skirts singed, her arms blistered, but she didn't stop until every animal was safe. When at last the flames were beaten back, the land was blackened, but the ranch still stood. The children clung to Clara, tears streaking their soot-covered faces. Thomas looked at her, awe in his eyes. "You saved us," he said quietly. Clara shook her head, exhausted. "We saved each other." That night, the family huddled together in the half-burned barn, too weary to move inside. The stars stretched endless above them, a silent witness. Clara sat with Thomas's coat around her shoulders, the smell of smoke still clinging. His arm brushed against hers. Neither spoke for a long time. Finally, Thomas whispered, "Clara, you're more than I ever dared hope for. More than I deserve." Clara turned to him, her heart aching with tenderness. "No, Thomas, you're exactly what I prayed for, even when I didn't believe prayers would be answered." Their eyes met, and for the first time there was no fear, no doubt, no hesitation, just truth. Clara had faced storm, shame, and fire, and she had not only survived, but triumphed. Yet one question still remained, shimmering like dawn on the horizon. Could this fragile bond between her and Thomas grow into the enduring love both had long denied themselves? The land lay quiet after the fire charred, but alive. Out of the blackened earth, tiny shoots began to rise within days, stubborn and green, as if to remind everyone that life always finds its way back. Clara stood on the porch one early morning, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee Thomas had poured for her. The children were still asleep inside. For the first time in years, she felt stillness, not the stillness of despair, but of peace. Days after the fire, the ranch bustled with rebuilding. Neighbors, once strangers, came with tools, lumber, and food. Clara cooked meals for all of them, her laughter light surprising ringing across the yard. The children followed her everywhere. Samuel, once sullen, now walked tall, helping Thomas mend fences. Anna sang as she carried water, her voice clear and sweet. Even little Ruth, clutching Clara's skirts, giggled often. It wasn't perfect, no life ever was, but it was whole. Clara realized she was no longer merely surviving. She was living. One evening after the children were asleep, Thomas and Clara sat by the fire. The glow cast soft light over his weathered face. He was mending a broken stirrup, his hand steady when he finally spoke. "Clara," he said quietly, "I asked you once to stay for survival, for the children, for the ranch." He looked up, his eyes steady but vulnerable. "But I need to ask again, this time for me." Clara's breath caught. Thomas set aside the leather, leaning closer. "I've lived with loss. I've known emptiness. But since you came here, I've felt home. You've given me back more than I knew I'd lost. I don't want you here because of need. I want you here because of love." Her heart trembled. For 50 years, she had carried rejection, mockery, abandonment. But here now, someone was choosing her, not out of pity, not out of duty, but out of truth. Thomas, she whispered, tears glistening. I never thought I'd hear words like that again. He reached for her hand, rough palm against her calloused one. Stay with me, Clara. Not because of what we've endured, but because of what we can build. Her voice broke, but her answer was clear. Yes, Thomas. Yes. The next morning, Samuel found them together on the porch. He studied them quietly, then grinned. Guess that means we're a real family now. Anna clapped her hands. Little Ruth squealed. Even Caleb, who had held back his trust, finally wrapped his arms around Thomas's waist. It wasn't a grand wedding, just a promise spoken under the wide sky with the children standing witness. But it was enough. More than enough. Months passed. The ranch healed. Fields grew green again. Clara planted a small garden behind the house, her hands coaxing life from the soil. Thomas built her a sturdy kitchen table big enough for all of them. Each evening after chores were done, they gathered around that table. The children's chatter filled the air. Thomas's steady voice offered prayers of thanks. Clara, her heart once heavy with shame, now brimmed with quiet joy. She often thought back to the days of hunger, of scraps of loneliness. They felt like another lifetime. One autumn night, Clara stepped outside alone. The stars stretched endless overhead, the land rolling away like an ocean of grass. She wrapped Thomas's coat around her shoulders, the same one he had first draped over her when he found her starving at the gate. Her heart swelled. She thought of the journey, how rejection had nearly broken her, how kindness had pieced her back together, how love had finally made her whole. Life had not given her the story she once dreamed of, but it had given her something better, a second chance. Behind her, Thomas's voice called softly. Clara. She turned. He stood in the doorway, lantern in hand, his eyes warm and sure. And Clara knew she was home. From scraps to abundance, from shame to love, Clara had found her place not as a burden, but as the heart of a family. Yet as the seasons turned, one question lingered for the future. What legacy would she leave for the children who once called her Mama in whispers and now in joy? Sometimes love doesn't arrive dressed in grand gestures or perfect timing. Sometimes it comes quietly in the shape of warm bread offered to a hungry family, or in the simple words, stay with me forever. Clara's story reminds us that worth is never measured by wealth, appearance, or the cruel opinions of others. True worth is found in the quiet strength of a mother who refuses to give up, and in the kindness of a man who sees not just what the world mocks, but the heart that endures beneath. For those of us who have felt overlooked, forgotten, or left behind, Clara's journey speaks gently, you are not invisible. Healing can come late, but it can come. And sometimes it begins with one act of compassion, one moment of being seen. As we close this story, I invite you to reflect on your own life. Where have you found unexpected kindness? And how might you be that light for someone else who feels alone? Here on None, Wild West Saga. We believe stories like these remind us that even in the harshest seasons, hope and love can still grow. So if Clara's story touched you, I encourage you to subscribe. Share this video with a friend who might need its comfort, and leave a comment below. Tell us, would you like to hear more stories of women like Clara, of second chances and unexpected love? Because sometimes your words of reflection become the beginning of someone else's healing.